I am my mother's lawyer." The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder on a clear day, causing Judge Anderson to stop leafing through the documents and look up over his glasses. Ethan Miller was only 9 years old, but his voice cut through the formal silence of the family courtroom like a sharp blade. He stood next to his mother, Laura, who looked at him with a mixture of pride and terror. While across the room, Charles Harrington III, his biological father, almost choked on his coffee. "I'm sorry, young man, but this is a legal hearing between adults," said the judge with forced patience, looking at the skinny boy in glasses who dared to interrupt a $1 million custody case. "I know, Your Honor. I also know that according to Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by the United States, I have the right to express my opinion on matters that directly affect me." Ethan adjusted his glasses and opened a scribbled school notebook. "And this case definitely affects me." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Harrington, Chicago real estate mogul wearing a suit that cost more than Laura earned in 6 months, looked at his 2 expensive lawyers as if he wanted to strangle them. No one had prepared the ground to face a child quoting international law. Laura Miller worked 60 hours a week as a nursing assistant to raise Ethan on her own. In the 8 years since Charles discovered he was a father, he had appeared in the boy's life exactly 4 times, always with expensive gifts and empty promises. Now suddenly he wanted full custody. "Your Honor," Charles's lead attorney, Dr. Whitman, interjected, adjusting his tie knot. "This is highly irregular. The child has no legal capacity to—" "But I do have the right to be heard," Ethan interrupted him with a calmness that made several adults in the room shift uncomfortably. "And if you really cared about my well-being, you would want to hear what I have to say rather than trying to silence me." Charles leaned over to whisper something urgent in Dr. Whitman's ear. But Ethan continued, opening his notebook with precise movements. "Your Honor, I have prepared a documented presentation on why I should remain with my mother, including evidence of the petitioner's true motives." He paused, his eyes meeting Charles's for the first time. "Motives that I believe the court will find very enlightening." Charles's face paled visibly. What exactly had this boy discovered? And how had a 9-year-old managed to prepare better for this hearing than he and his millionaire lawyers? There in that silent courtroom, everyone was witnessing something extraordinary. A boy who held secrets capable of bringing down empires built on lies. If this story of courage and intelligence is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Ethan was about to reveal would change not only his life, but the way the justice system views the voice of children forever. Dr. Whitman quickly regained his composure as any experienced lawyer would. "Your Honor, while we admire the child's creativity, this court deals with complex family law issues that require adequate legal representation." "Then why didn't you provide one for him?" Ethan asked, closing his notebook with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent room. "In the last 8 months of this case, no one thought it important to hear the opinion of the person most affected by this decision." Charles Harrington shifted uneasily in his chair. There was something about the boy's calmness that bothered him deeply. Ethan didn't seem the least bit intimidated by the formal surroundings, the expense of lawyers, or the imposing presence of his own biological father. Laura watched her son with a mixture of pride and panic. For weeks, Ethan had been coming home from school with strange books from a library, legal codes, children's rights manuals, court precedents. She had thought it was just academic curiosity from a bright child. She never imagined he was preparing for this. "Your Honor," Dr. Whitman continued, "my client, Charles Harrington, is seeking custody because he is genuinely concerned about the welfare of his son. Ms. Miller, while well-meaning, simply does not have the resources to provide the educational and social opportunities that a gifted child like Ethan deserves." "Interesting," Ethan muttered, opening his notebook again. "Genuine concern." He flipped through a few scribbled pages. "Your Honor, may I share some facts about this genuine concern?" Judge Anderson, who had presided over hundreds of custody cases, had never seen a situation like this. On the one hand, he had strict protocols to follow. On the other hand, this child displayed an articulation and preparation that surpassed many adults. "Ethan," Laura said softly, Maybe we should let the lawyers— What lawyers, Mom? Ethan interrupted her gently. We can't afford to hire Dr. Whitman or his colleagues. So either I speak for us or no one speaks. Charles Harrington finally found his voice. Ethan, son, I know this situation is confusing for you, but don't call me son. The words came out with a coldness that made several adults in the room shiver. In the last 9 years of my life, you've shown up exactly 4 times. 2 on birthdays, always 3 weeks late. 1 at Christmas when you had 20 minutes free between social engagements, and 1 when the local press did a story on philanthropic entrepreneurs and you needed a photo with a child. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan continued. The last time we saw each other 6 months ago, you spent 15 minutes in our apartment. Just long enough to criticize our furniture, complain about the medicine smell my mother brings home from a hospital, and suggest that I might have potential if I received a proper education. Ethan adjusted his glasses. Interestingly, 2 weeks after that, you filed for custody. Dr. Whitman whispered something urgent to Charles. But the boy wasn't finished. Your Honor, I've done some research on my biological father. I discovered that he recently lost a very expensive lawsuit against his business partners. I discovered that his 3rd wife has filed for a contested divorce. And I discovered something very interesting about a trust fund established by my late paternal grandmother. Charles Harrington's face went from pink to white in a matter of seconds. How on earth had this boy uncovered information that not all of his lawyers knew about? Ethan turned a page in his notebook and smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. It wasn't the innocent smile of a child. It was the smile of someone who was holding winning cards and was ready to play them. But before we talk about inheritances and financial motives, Ethan said, closing his notebook again, how about we discuss why a man who never showed any genuine interest in being a father suddenly developed such a strong paternal instinct? Charles Harrington was visibly sweating now, and his expensive lawyers looked completely lost. None of them had prepared to face a child who apparently knew more about their client's financial situation than they did. What exactly had this 9-year-old boy discovered during his afternoons at the library? And how had a child managed to gather information that adults with unlimited resources did not have? Judge Anderson leaned forward, his judicial curiosity clearly piqued. In 30 years on the bench, he had never seen such an articulate child in his courtroom. Ethan, you mentioned evidence. What kind of evidence could a 9-year-old have gathered? Ethan adjusted his glasses again, a gesture that was becoming his trademark in that courtroom. Your Honor, for the past 3 months since I learned of this lawsuit, I have devoted every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon to researching at the Central Public Library. Researching what? Dr. Whitman interrupted condescendingly. Public records, newspaper archives, available corporate documents, Mr. Harrington's previous court cases. Ethan opened a new section of his notebook. The head librarian, Mrs. Delgado, has a master's degree in information science and taught me how to access basic legal databases. Laura looked at her son in amazement. For months, Ethan had said he was studying for a special project at the library. She never imagined the project was to save his family. Charles Harrington finally exploded. This is ridiculous. A 9-year-old boy digging into my private life like some kind of private investigator. Public information, sir, Ethan corrected calmly. All perfectly legal and accessible to any American citizen, regardless of age. Mrs. Delgado had become much more than a librarian to Ethan. When he first showed up, asking about how family courts work, she quickly realized it wasn't academic curiosity. It was desperation masquerading as determination. That boy has been coming here religiously for 3 months, she had told Laura the week before when she finally called concerned. He reads legal codes like other kids read comic books. He's learning too fast to be normal. Ethan continued his presentation methodically. I've discovered that in the last 18 months, Mr. Harrington has faced 3 significant lawsuits. He lost a $2.3 million dispute with former partners in Harrington Enterprises. His current wife, his 3rd, has filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Legal code, for he hid money from me. Charles's face was red with anger. How dare you? And more interestingly, Ethan interrupted, turning pages methodically, I discovered that my late paternal grandmother, Margaret Harrington, Established a trust fund of 1.7 million specifically for me, accessible only when I turn 18 or when my biological father obtains full legal custody. The silence in the room was absolute. Dr. Whitman whispered something urgent to Charles, who ignored him completely. "Your Honor, this is no coincidence," Ethan continued. "What?" "My grandmother died when I was 2 years old. For 7 years, Mr. Harrington never mentioned my existence to her, never took me to meet her, never allowed her to know she had a grandson." Laura remembered it perfectly. Charles had been categorical. "My family does not need to know about it," referring to his own son as it. But when Mrs. Margaret Harrington discovered about me through private investigation, something I discovered in the estate records, she immediately set up the fund with one very specific condition. Ethan paused dramatically, knowing that everyone in the room was hanging on his every word. The money would be released for my care and education only if my father demonstrated genuine commitment to the child's welfare by obtaining legal custody. If he never sought custody, the money would go directly to me at age 18 with no parental access whatsoever. The math was simple and cruel. Charles had ignored Ethan for 9 years, missing his chance to access the inheritance money through natural custody. Now broke and desperate, he was trying to force late custody to access the funds. "But there's something my grandmother couldn't have foreseen," Ethan said, closing his notebook. "She didn't know her son would develop a career in ruining small family businesses through predatory practices." Dr. Whitman stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is getting completely out of hand. The child is making baseless accusations. I can prove everything I'm saying." Ethan opened his school backpack and pulled out a surprisingly organized manila folder. "I have here copies of 17 lawsuits over the past 5 years where Harrington Enterprises purchased properties from financially distressed families for well below market value using insider information obtained through contacts at local banks." Laura watched her son turn a custody hearing into an impromptu criminal investigation using only a public library and relentless determination. "One of these families," Ethan continued, pulling printed photos from the folder, "owned a small bakery. The Alvarez family, Mexican immigrants who worked 18 hours a day. Mr. Harrington found out through his friend at the bank that they were 3 months behind on their loan due to the emergency hospitalization of their youngest son." Charles Harrington was now visibly sweating. "This has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Ethan interrupted, "because it shows a pattern of behavior. A man who preys on vulnerable families for financial gain. And now he's trying to prey on his own vulnerable family for the same reason." Judge Anderson leafed through the documents Ethan had presented, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Where did you get this information, Ethan?" "Public court records, local newspaper archives, incorporation documents available on the state database." Ethan listed each source meticulously. "Mrs. Delgado taught me that the truth is almost always publicly available. We just have to know where to look." Dr. Whitman tried one last push. "Your Honor, even if these allegations were true, which we are not admitting, they do not change the fact that my client can provide better educational opportunities for the child." Ethan smiled, not the innocent smile of a child, but the calculated smile of someone who had saved his strongest card for last. "About education," he said, opening a final section of the notebook. "May I share something interesting about Mr. Harrington's educational plans for me?" It was then that Charles Harrington fully understood what he had underestimated. His 9-year-old son wasn't just smart, he was strategic, and he had uncovered secrets that even his own lawyers didn't know. What exactly had Ethan discovered about Charles's true plans for his education? And how had a child managed to build a stronger case than millionaire lawyers using only a public library and the help of a dedicated librarian? In the silent courtroom, everyone waited for the final revelation that promised to be even more devastating than anything they had heard so far. "On the subject of education," Ethan repeated, opening a final section of his notebook with the precision of a surgeon. "I would like to share Mr. Harrington's true educational plans for me." Charles Harrington swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously between his lawyer and the boy who had become his worst nightmare. "During one of my 4 visits to him over the past 9 years, Ethan continued methodically. I overheard a very interesting phone conversation. Mr. Harrington was talking to someone about solving the child problem after obtaining custody. Dr. Whitman stood up abruptly. Your Honor, private conversations cannot— I can prove every word, Ethan interrupted, pulling a small digital recorder from his briefcase. Mrs. Delgado taught me that documenting evidence is fundamental to any legal case. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Harrington was now visibly shaking, his fingers drumming nervously on the table as he realized he had completely underestimated his own son's intelligence. This recording was made during his last visit to our apartment 6 months ago, Ethan explained calmly to the judge. Mr. Harrington thought I was doing my homework in my room, but the recorder was left on in the living room. Judge Anderson picked up the device and examined it. Ethan, are you sure you want to present this as evidence? Absolutely certain, Your Honor. The sound of the recording echoed through the silent courtroom. The unmistakable voice of Charles Harrington spoke into the phone. Listen, as soon as I get legal custody, the boy is going straight to Riverside Military Academy. It's a strict boarding school in Colorado. They know how to handle troubled children. He'll stay there until he's 18, and I'll have full access to the inheritance funds for educational expenses. The other person's voice was inaudible, but Charles continued. Exactly. $500 a month for boarding. The rest is mine. The kid doesn't even have to know about the money. It's a perfect solution. She's out of the picture. I have access to the funds, and I still look like a responsible father. Laura covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. She never knew Charles had planned to get rid of Ethan so cruelly. Dr. Whitman was pale, realizing that his client had just been destroyed by his own words. There's more, Ethan said calmly, stopping the recording. This part is about what he really thinks of me. The second part of the recording was even more devastating. The problem isn't just the money. It's that the boy is too smart for his own good. He asks questions, observes everything. It would be best to keep him out of the picture until he's 18, and I can sort out the financial situation. Kids like him. Well, you know, we don't want him getting any ideas above his station. Charles Harrington exploded. This is a trap. He provoked me on purpose. A 9-year-old boy can't— A 9-year-old can't what? Ethan interrupted him, his voice cutting like a knife. Can't be smart? Can't defend himself? Can't expose the truth about a father who sees him as a problem to be solved? Judge Anderson turned off the tape recorder and looked directly at Charles Harrington. Mr. Harrington, this recording combined with the financial evidence presented paints a very clear picture of your true motivations. Your Honor, Ethan continued, I have also discovered that Riverside Military Academy has a terrible track record. In the last 5 years, 3 students have committed suicide there. The institution is under federal investigation for physical and emotional abuse of minors. Dr. Whitman tried one last desperate card. Your Honor, even considering these allegations, the fact remains that my client has superior financial resources. To do what? Ethan interrupted him. To send me to a place where children die? To use my inheritance money while pretending to care about me? To isolate me from the only person who truly loves me? Charles Harrington finally lost his composure completely. You're nothing but an arrogant child who doesn't know his place. I'm your father. And you're a stranger who shares my DNA, Ethan replied with a calmness that sent a chill through the room. A real father wouldn't try to get rid of his own son to steal his money. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. Mr. Harrington, sit down immediately or you will be removed from my courtroom. Ethan turned to the last page of his notebook. Your Honor, there is one last thing I need to mention. Something I discovered about why my grandmother really set up that trust fund. Charles Harrington paled even more, if that was possible. I found a letter from her in the estate files. A letter addressed to me to be opened when I turned 16. Ethan took a deep breath. But the librarian helped me find out that I can request early access in cases of custody disputes. The final bombshell was about to drop. My grandmother knew her son better than anyone else. In the letter she wrote, If Charles ever fights for your custody, know that it's not because he loves you, but because he loves the money. Fight him with everything you have because you are smarter than him, and you deserve better. Laura broke down in tears. hugging her son as the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Anderson finally spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. Based on the overwhelming evidence, this court not only denies Mr. Harrington's custody request, but will also open a separate investigation into potential fraud and abuse of the trust fund. Full custody remains with Ms. Miller, and Mr. Harrington is ordered to pay all legal costs. The gavel fell, marking the end of the most extraordinary custody hearing in the history of that court. Ethan closed his notebook, hugged his mother, and whispered in her ear, "We did it, Mom. We won." But everyone in that room knew the truth. It wasn't just a victory for a mother and her son. It was the day a 9-year-old boy proved that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power.